What's up, everybody? So we've had the pleasure, Shannon, between this Influencer on 3 podcast collaboration to talk to athletes, parents of athletes, former athletes, coaches, all about NIL, value in the market, what's going on. And the reality is we hear a lot of topics that we want to debate and unpack even further on our own. And so in this episode, we're going to do that.
Yeah, I think it's a great opportunity for us to dig in and debate these. Some of these things we'll agree on, some of these things we won't. And there's so many different topics. So we'll hit some today. If this goes well, maybe we come back and do it again.
Yeah. So I think, the first place to start, I think, is the miseducation of the fan, right? So college sports fans are what fuel the multi-billion-dollar business that college sports is, right? They spend money on merchandise, tickets, they watch broadcasts that advertisers pay for access to reach them through. The college sports fan is the reason that college sports is what it is, but yet I worry that a lot of college sports fans don't necessarily understand how college sports work. For instance, NIL is something that I think a lot of fans believe is a big moneymaker for all student athletes. But the reality is it's not really a big moneymaker for the majority of student athletes. And for those who do make money, they're not even going to be able to keep all their money because their NIL deals are taxable. So they need to save 30 to 40% of it to pay their taxes, right? And so writers and media sources have only written about the Zion Williamsons and the Trevor Lawrences. And the reality is there's the everyday male or female student athlete that this might just be another extra income source for and not a big moneymaker for.
Yeah, absolutely. It goes into that from my perspective. I think the biggest misunderstanding is around value. And so when you look at value, to me, the first thing to look at is time. Okay, the NIL process is really, that whole industry, everything has just started. It's just begun. So now there's funds, there's money that is just now started to flow. So there's a huge misconception of how many dollars are out there and who's making money, from that process. The second thing around value, which I think is really, really a big misunderstanding, is this kind of concept around roster value and brand value. Roster value is maybe what I am worth as an athlete, around roster management for that program. A quarterback's obviously worth more than a safety and so forth. But then there's this idea around brand value. And brand value has a lot to do with my exposure beyond sports. It's my influence, my social channels. Think of it from the perspective of Aaron Rodgers. He has a contract to play in the NFL. He has endorsement deals. And I really think that if we start looking at this whole value proposition from those two buckets, and I know they mesh together in a lot of ways, but if we look at it from those two buckets, then we will have a better understanding of what these athletes are actually worth in the marketplace and where they should actually look to go try to get those funds and participate in NIL.
Well, and the reality is that value still has to be realized. And to realize value, if you're an athlete, requires you to take initiative, spend and invest time into fulfilling whatever deal it is you're going to fulfill, signing autographs, making an appearance, doing a social media post. And a lot of athletes at the college level don't have much time. I mean, you're talking about, this is not pro sports. They have classes and academic responsibility on top of everything they have to do as an athlete. And in most cases, they don't have a lot of help. They don't have an agent. They don't have a players association. So realizing the value is a whole other part of this that has to really be supported by brands or any dollars that want to spend money with athletes. They need to help them actually fulfill what they're signing on to do because it takes time.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big process. It's an infrastructure. It's a plan. It's people. It's resources to go get that. I want to ask you a question. So and see if you believe these numbers. I've seen some studies recently that 2023 NIL is going to be around $1 billion. Okay, those same studies are saying that over the course of the next 3 to 4 years, it's going to grow somewhere between $3.5 to $4 billion. Okay, I got two questions. First one's kind of a yes or no. Do you believe in those numbers, or do you think those numbers are high?
I think those numbers are a little high.
Okay, here's what I think. Okay, I think it's still very difficult to know how dead on those numbers are, but I do think the overwhelming amount of growth that's going to come is going to be from national sponsorships
Yes, it will.
and agents, the very traditional sales model that we've seen. And my question to you is, we both agree on that. What are these athletes doing right now? What are the programs doing, the collectives doing to start getting themselves ready for that marketplace? Because that marketplace is completely different than this collective language and this roster management and this small ball, around their endemic local communities of where a lot of the money is coming from now.
Yeah, so before I get to what they're doing to prepare, I think, to go back to the answer, my one-word answer was, I think, it's a little high. Whether it's high or not, it's not that it's that far off from a total standpoint. It's more of, if it's $1 billion and there's 100,000 Division I student athletes, you're talking about $10,000 an athlete. Athletes already get an educator-related benefits check and a cost of attendance check, and if they come from a low-income situation, they also get a Pell Grant that greatly outweighs $10,000 for some extra work around their NIL, and all those dollars are tax-free. And that's in addition to free gear, free sneakers, free food, you name it. So right now is the best time in history. I said it before, the golden era of the student athlete. I've said that on a previous podcast, I think when Trent was on. And they also can be a free agent every year, by the way, because of the transfer portal.
Yeah.
So that's where we're at. And so even if it's $1 billion market, you're not talking about a large amount per athlete. And so that's the part I don't think that everybody thinks about, because all they hear is billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar market. Now, what are schools doing to prepare? Well, I think schools are now starting to build programs, or at least conceptualize programs. I think conferences are too, to have a group licensing model to flow big brands through, just like you've seen at the pro level. Of course, at the pro level, those are collectively bargained on behalf of the athletes. There's nobody to do that on behalf of the athletes at the college
level. They just have
level.
more mailbox money, though, for those guys.
It is mailbox money, but that's, you want to know how Bose is going to come in and spend dollars with 10 SEC quarterbacks? You have to have a group licensing program that fits into. Otherwise, Bose has to talk to each agent separately for each quarterback. Oh, and these 3 quarterbacks don't have an agent. They're going to need all the hand-holding you can think of to fulfill that deal, and it's a mess. And then Bose says, we'll just work with Bryce Young. And so it's like figuring out these frameworks is on the school, and it's on the conferences. And until those are figured out, a lot of the big brands who are used to working through those frameworks at the pro level are not going to have an NIL budget, I don't think.
Yeah, I personally think that the national money, which it's going to be agency driven to a large degree, that's going to flow to the bigger names, the big name programs. And so I think those numbers are actually going to be fairly large, because you're not going to be splitting from a universe of 10,000 kids or athletes or so. The thing that I'm really interested in watching going forward is and I think the word is positive, the positive impact NIL has on women's sports. Because I really think there's going to be a lot of opportunity and a lot of money there that's really going to subsidize, because that's going to be an interesting thing to watch, because women are probably a little more women athletes are a little maybe a little better communicators, a little more.
They're more active on social.
Yeah, they're more active on social. They have larger social accounts. They're more sharing of their lives than we get these athletes in here. They're buttoned up.
Yeah,
they're tall.
Yeah.
Like, not saying much.
Yeah, they delete their posts.
Male
athletes, who are big time, I would say more than 50% of them have a habit of wanting to have less than 10 posts showing on their Instagram. They delete their posts. Women athletes are the exact opposite.
It's completely different, and but it's the impact on women's sports is one of the things. I don't really have data right now. I can't tell you much.
I have data.
But
the average SEC football player does a $3,400 deal inside of the influencer system. Yeah. The average women's gymnast in the SEC, $17,000.
Wow.
$17,000 is the average deal for an SEC gymnast.
Yeah, and those numbers are going to continue to go up, because I think national brands are going to. They're going to flock to those situations, and so I'm not in the business of coaching, any of these kids, and really don't talk to hardly any of them, but if I had a son or influence, I would tell them now, we need to start thinking about how you portray your brand and who you are, and social media has been a taboo for so many of these athletes. It was either used as a inner circle social, for relationships. But they need to start building their social plans.
Yep.
Going forward, and not be so boring.
And it's hard, you have personalities that play out in digital formats, and you can see who wants to take initiative there and who doesn't. And the reality is this: you look at On3 and the valuation system of looking at an athlete's performance rating, exposure rating, and influence rating. Well, a lot of folks who are really good with performance don't have as much influence, even though they might have a high social following because they're so good at performance. They don't post often. They don't get good engagement. That's not their thing. And then on the other side, they're buttoned up. On the other side, there's some athletes who are phenomenal with their influence. Yep. They don't play at all, but they're good enough with their influence. They can make money off that. It's when the athlete has both. And I think there's a lot of SEC gymnasts, to go back to that example, who are performing well on the mat, and they're really good with their social influence. And when you get those two together, your annual earnings potential increases.
Huge opportunity in women's sports.
Yep.
That's one of the stories I really want to watch.
So one thing we were talking about earlier is just, who's in charge, right? Because I think another misconceptions fans have, the first one was that every athlete's making a ton of money with NIL. Another big misconception is who's in charge. And I think, one thing that I think fans need to understand is a lot of the commissioners and ADs you see out in the forefront making decisions, they're not making those decisions on an island. A commissioner has, 14 presidents that are essentially his or her bosses. A lot of times those presidents don't even understand how college sports works to the same degree that the athletic director, who's kind of the president's proxy, does. And so there's another 14 presidents and their ADs. There's 28 people a commissioner's got to get on board with a decision. Same thing for an athletic director. You're thinking about the billionaires who support the program, and the board of trustees and the board of regents, and their president needs to be in support of a coaching hire or a decision they have to make with their program. And so because there's a lot of different bosses or people that an AD or a commissioner has to get on board to make decisions, it's really slowing down some of the innovation that has to occur around NIL, around whether athletes are employees or not, around what new conferences look like, all these things that college sports has to figure out. That's why it's taking so much time.
Well, let's call a spade too. You're talking about a lot of risk-averse people. I mean, You're talking about a lot of professionals that come from the world of academia, versus, entrepreneurs and business leaders, initially.
Yeah.
So they're going to take less risk, which is, in my mind, that's going to slow this whole process down. You've got, states aren't aligned, federal government's not going to be any real help. So this thing's going to take a long time to play out.
It is, and that's why I think, the ability for certain conferences to set themselves apart by having conference regulatory uniformity with all schools using the same NIL rule formula and having a level playing field, figuring that out even with the states where those schools reside so that you can have uniformity, or having a group licensing program, or doing things that create similar economies of scale with NIL at the college level as we've seen at the pro level with some of the leagues at the pro level. And it's harder to do that across all FBS schools or all of Division I because of the differences between the schools. But when you go at the conference level, the Patriot League schools are pretty similar to each other, as are the Big Ten schools, pretty similar to each other.
But if I'm the head coach, I'm forced, or if I'm the school, I've got to go by the state laws. And take the SEC, for example. How many states in the SEC? What's the
Big Ten?
10 states. How many of them are aligned state-wise?
Right.
So how does that happen legally above board? That's going to also take some time. So I'm 100% agreement with you that the best model by far is the conference model. Okay, there is no question. Here are your 16 schools, your 20 schools, your 18 schools, whatever that number is. Here are the rules we're playing by, and it's clearly understood. But that can't happen with state laws not aligned.
Right.
So, and how does it? So
I think the one route is what Alabama's done by repealing its state law and eliminating it altogether, or South Carolina has done by suspending its state law. And so can you get all the states to do that? The other side is
how does that not look like collusion though?
Sure. The other side is actually, lobbying with the states to make some small tweaks because they're not that far apart. Mm-hmm. One of the biggest things that states do or don't have in their NIL legislation is school involvement and the allowance of it. And we all know
that's Pandora's
that schools should be more involved at least than they're allowed to be at this point.
Yeah.
Because when a kid has any need at the college level, he or she is going to ask the school for help with an injury, team doctor. With academics, we need an advisor or a tutor. And now they're looking at a contract that in perpetuity signs away their entire rights, and there's nobody to look at it. And is the juice worth the squeeze? The liability of a school helping with a contract worth it to avoid an athlete making a bad decision? And those are the kind of things
they have the same liability in other facets of their job. So to me, the school has to be involved.
Right.
And so we have to be careful now. Because I'm going to ask you the question in a minute about employment, W-2 or not. But schools have to get involved in this whole process. So slide on over here to the collective. Okay, what's your take on this dynamic?
Well, the school not being involved, especially
opens the door for
way hands off the first 6 months of NIL, right? Like I was literally in rooms, Shannon, where a coach would take out a business card from a local car dealership and say, am I allowed to give this to one of my student athletes because this guy wants to pay them to promote his car dealership? And the compliance person would say, no, that's against the state law. That's a felony if you give that business card to the young man on your team, right? And we left that phase after about 6 months, and schools started getting more comfortable with at least connecting opportunities and business owners who could provide opportunities with their student athletes. But that first 6 month period, that hands-off period, left the door open for donors and just frankly millionaires and billionaires who've always thought they could run the athletic program better than the athletic department to now start directly interfacing with student athletes because of NIL. And in those direct interfacing situations, what's happened is they've kind of done their best to maybe go by the rules, but they're also type A, successful, wealthy individuals who are going to do things their way.
Yeah.
And so some collectives are doing a great job. They're creating really creative opportunities for student athletes to have an environment where they can monetize their NIL in a fixed amount of time through an appearance. There's no real way you could argue against what they're paying because there's no real market value provisions in any legislation or the NCAA waivers. So they can really pay what they want. The question is, when the athlete does or doesn't perform, or the team does or doesn't perform, will that collective want to keep spending that money instead of spending it as a donor on a building in their family's name or a scholarship in their family's name? And I think the answer will be both for that. I think some of those dollars will tire out and some will continue because the team wins. But it's a very tied to pay for play type situation, even though it's not pay for play.
I think the pay for play part is the schools have to win. I think it's the whole donation model to a degree now. Now there will come a time soon where buildings aren't being built because we have a new need here.
Yep.
We have a new need for funds, and it is the athlete NIL collective, whatever you want to call that thing. Okay, so that is 100%. The only way that continues to not be a problem is the teams win. Only so many teams win.
100%. I mean,
so the pressure on coaches now, it was already like, show me a year and basically you're out the door. And so like I want to see, I've always wondered, you take this coach from a group of 5 and he gets his dream job and then they lock him into 6 years with all this guaranteed money and then they're getting rid of him in 2 years. I mean, so do those contracts change now? Do the schools now have a little more leverage because they've built an infrastructure, they've built the support, they've raised the money, where maybe they're not so upside down all these onerous contracts and the turnover of coaches. All this has got to give somewhere.
Well, and it's all happening at the same time as the transfer portal. And so what that does is it creates an annual negotiation period where athletes are going to want to see how other athletes at other schools are doing with their NIL, as well as how those athletes are doing on the field and how much that school has a chance of winning. And they're going to equate chance of winning, chance of making it to the next level, some money I could make with NIL into a decision on where they're going to go. And that really is kind of like the perfect storm, right? NIL and the portal at the same time.
The general manager position, which has typically not been a position in college sports, college football,
right,
college basketball, to me is maybe the single most important job outside of head coach going forward. Now, if you look at salaries of assistant coaches and head coaches and the GM isn't treated like the GM. And just because there's not a salary cap in college, which there's not, that GM position now, better get serious with that one, because how much collective money is going to be allocated in the recruiting process to the elites of the elites. But you have to build this foundation of funds for performing athletes to show you come here, you do your job, you play, this is what it looks like. And to keep kids from transferring,
no doubt,
to help fill your roster out with other transfers coming in. That's not going to happen by a titled position with no power. That's going to happen with a real deal GM that understands math, that has a staff, understands the science behind it all, and has the influence with the assistant coaches, the head coach, the collectives, the administration to actually do his job.
And I would throw the business community in with the collectives. Ultimately, you're not allowed to induce recruits. And we know that different people are playing that system different ways, but that is the one real rule that the NCAA is leaning in on now. We'll see how much they lean in on it. We'll see if anyone really gets some infractions coming their way on that provision. But the point I want to make is what you can do as a coach, as a GM, is you can get the dollars to be aware of how to help the current athletes. And you can sell that all day. Here's where you go to work with them. Here's how you work with them. Here's what the rules are. And you can make that, just something you're talking about in your communications plan as a coach all the time, right? And you're pushing donors and your collective and the business community on here's how you work with our current players. Then you can see from compliance reports what the current athletes are making, and you can start to build a story around the success of your current athletes with NIL. And by doing that, you're seeing what the market's paying your current athletes with NIL. You're understanding how the market's being set at your school. And then when you talk to a recruit, you can explain to them how your current athletes are doing with real numbers and real data to help them understand what's possible with these businesses, with this collective. That is allowed. And that's the part that I don't think coaches are willing to do the work around right now. They just want to be able to say, here's what you can do. It's more. You got to raise the dollars. You got to get them to know how to activate with your current roster. And then you got to be able to report the success of your current roster to the recruits.
Look, I'm a big culture guy. And here's the deal. The system, the teams ultimately that are going to work and work well are the teams that have the culture where the funds go to the athletes on campus that are playing, that are doing what they're supposed to do, that are acting the right way versus on the front end, and look, we're seeing that. We're seeing both sides of it right now.
Right.
It's going to be real interesting to me. I bet the teams that have one, that do it that way, are going to continue to win. And then the transient movement of these other programs and the troubles and all the things are going to be off the charts. That's just one of the negatives, but it'll all figure itself out. I think at the end of the day, there's going to be an enormous amount of money from national brands that come into NIL. Those funds have to be, they're so large, the schools are going to have to build the support systems around to handle this industry, this business.
Yep.
And that's not happening at a fast enough pace right now.
It's not happening fast enough. Most of the people that are being dedicated to a campus are coming from contracted out organizations who are hiring employees that are taking the risk to staff somebody on campus that's there. Some programs are innovating. I love, you see a South Carolina partnering with Everett Sports Marketing, who has the experience at the pro level working with pro athletes, and they're going to staff a 7-person staff in Columbia to help South Carolina student athletes with NIL. It just needs to ramp that part up. That's going to make brands feel more comfortable about spending money with these athletes who, quite frankly, don't have the support to really fulfill what a lot of brands would want them to fulfill in doing a deal.
Well, here's the deal. The difference between the local advertiser and then the national brand are completely different, because the national brands, Gillette comes into this, and if they select 10 players, they're going to want those 10 players to perform. They're going to want them to honor their agreements. They're going to want them to fulfill whatever obligations they've signed up for, and they're going to want performance and return on investment for those dollars. That's a big boy, big girl world. That's completely different than the local tire store here throwing little Johnny $5,000 to roll around, with the bumper sticker. That's a different world. The problem right now is that most of these athletes do not have the support system through their parents and their peers to handle the tax implications, the fulfillment, the contract, and all the things. And so if the universities don't step up, be bold, be disruptive, take chances, take risks around the support part of it, spend the money, then we're going to have problems. If they do that, I think this all works itself out in a much faster pace.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that the ability for the leader of the athletic department, the athletic director, him or herself, as well as his or her coaches, to understand how to communicate to the supporters of the university, whether they're national brands, local brands, a collective, on what it's going to take to work with their student athletes, and then have the support structure set up for their student athletes to build their brands and grow their value, right? Both on the field with their performance and off the field with their influence. To then, as they have a deal come their way, help them with deal making, what contract they sign, what the terms are, what the value is in regard to the contract they're signing, to help the student athlete fulfill whatever they've signed, showing up, making an appearance, taking a picture, writing a certain caption in a post, signing autographs, whatever. And then once they've been paid, advising them or having an accounting firm that's available to help them know, hey, save 40% of everything you make and we'll help you do your taxes. These things all do not have to be done directly by the school if they feel certain liabilities or conflicts of interest, but there needs to be solutions in place for the student athletes at the school in these categories of deal making, fulfillment, and what I would call business management, or else there's going to be a lot of aftershocks that aren't going to look good, not just for the athlete, but the school they played for. So it actually is liability mitigation at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's reputation too. It's reputation. I mean, do you run a program where you have all kind of situations running around? That's gonna reflect bad on that program, that university, and especially these universities. I mean, they're smart people and lots of money, so they shouldn't have these problems. All right, we have 4 or 5 more minutes here, and I want to end with something that you and I both completely agree on this answer. And I want you to explain, because you go deep in this, you've researched it, around W-2 or contractors So we both agree on this. So I'll go ahead and ask the leading question, or give us the statement. Tell us why college athletes should not be W-2 employees at their institutions or conferences or.
Yeah. So the first point we started with was, not everybody that's a student athlete right now is making a bunch of money off of NIL. And the second one was NIL is actually way harder for the student athlete than people think, right? And then the third one is the answer is not for them to be an employee. So, the reality is this. A student athlete right now, we talked about the golden era right now for college sports if you're a student athlete because of the reasons we discussed. They have it really good. They can go to a great school, get a great education for free. They have unlimited gear. If you play basketball, unlimited sneakers, right? Unlimited gear. They have a chef in the kitchen cooking for them. They have 3 or 4 strength coaches helping them, not just with every workout, but customizing it for each athlete. I mean, your protein shake is going to have a different macros breakdown based on what your goal is. Like, it's that amazing for a student athlete. Get a cost of attendance check for expenses. If they perform just 3.0 or better in the classroom, most schools now give them $6,000 a year for educator-related benefits. And for athletes who come from a lower income situation, they get a Pell Grant, right? So
I want to give you 2 more.
Go ahead.
I'll give you 2 more.
Yeah.
Okay. They also get, in most cases, if they want it, an incredible education.
Yeah, and I said that at the beginning.
With tutors, support systems, online schools, all the things. The second thing that they get, which I think is probably far greater than anything, I grew up in a town of 300 people, okay? They get relationships. They get network.
Yeah.
They get to walk up and meet people that have done things in life, that have been successful, that have been to corners of this planet that they hadn't been to.
No doubt. And so should and could athletes make more money with their NIL? Yes, great. Let's figure out economies of scale to make that happen. But the second we move them over to become an employee, we're first of all going to have to pay for that. The money that's going to pay for that is going to come out of the money that supports a lot of the other sports that don't make money. So now you're going to run right up amok Title IX. Are we going to have women's field hockey anymore? Because we have 30 sports here at North Carolina. Or are we going to have to cancel 16 sports so that we can fund our football and basketball teams all having salaries? Those are going to be the kind of questions asked.
Okay, so number one, what you're saying is that it really could take a hit. I mean, Title IX could take a hit in this because you would have to have some parity in all the support, all the funding.
No doubt.
Across all this many
Now, an
athletes.
argument you'll hear about that is, well, what about if coaches take less money and athletic directors make less money and other people make less money? And it's a good point, but they're at where they're at now. So backing that up,
take less money.
It's going to be a tougher
signing up to go.
Yeah,
I'll take less money.
But the point is this: the money that pays for those sports would now be used for payroll.
It's spread out.
All right. So that's number one. Number two, once you pay a student athlete on payroll, there's a few things risky that I don't think student athletes want. Number one, they can now be fired. You don't perform well, you don't lose your scholarship right now. It's actually now a rule. You can't hold a scholarship over a young man or woman's head if they don't perform well. You don't perform well and you got a salary, you're fired. Okay? So they're now able to be terminated. The second big risk is all of the different expenses that have been really perk expenses to recruit. 5 strength coaches. We're going to have 1 strength coach now. You guys are going to share the cost of the other 4. Unlimited sneakers or cleats. You get 1 pair of cleats at the beginning of the season. You're going to share the cost for any new gear you buy.
100% the support staff is reduced. The
support staff's reduced. The equipment's reduced. The chefs in the kitchen are reduced. All these things are now going to be paid for. They're either going to be reduced or paid for by the athlete. They're going to endure all these costs. And the biggest cost they're going to have to take on is tuition. And so that's where this will go. They'll pass that to the student athlete. And that's why having the ability to collectively bargain for student athletes, having the ability to organize student athletes and educate them on this is going to be more and more important as time goes on.
My fear would be, as crazy as this may sound, I mean, I can explain it well. My fear would be, it would be at the academic, athletic, college level, it'd be less of a meritocracy. It would be more of a disbursement of funds across the board rather than those that go out and earn it and do it, getting a disproportionate share to those than those that don't. And I don't like that. That's not the way I was raised. You can argue it all day long.
But it also goes against the whole model because it's Division I or the SEC for a reason. It's hard to get on the field. It's hard to get a scholarship. It's hard to get good grades while you're going to school. It's hard to do all these things.
Eat what you kill.
But nothing great comes from something that is easy. And so here we are, you get on this stage, and now if you perform well and you do a good job managing your brand and you stay out of trouble and you promote all these things you're about both on and off the field, your exposure here at this school combined with that influence on your social media and your performance on the field is going to allow you to make an above average amount of money with your NIL. In addition to free gear, chefs, strength coaches, stipends, educator-related benefits, etc.
Here's the deal, though. Which one of those paths create the habits to make them successful in life? I mean, they go through all this. They're still out at, 22 years old or whatever. So they've got to go live now mathematically, another 50-something years. I would want my children to go earn it, to learn, and not be given anything. So that's what would prepare them for this next stage of life, that's what college supposedly is all about.
Yep, it's a tough one, and I think that as time goes on, I think more and more athletes I talk to are coming to grips with that reality and are understanding that they are playing in a timely season where NIL is now added to these other fortunate happenings for the athlete, and they're trying to make the most of it. And I don't see a lot of athletes fighting for employment at this point.
I don't either. Look, I think this, my last thought here just comes down to this. I think the movement in this market, the billions of dollars is going to come as we open this up. National brands, big brands, that money is not going to want to be dispersed evenly. That's going to be demanded to be spent by the influencers and the movers that perform on the field.
Yep.
So that model does not work as a W-2 employee.
Yep. Well, I know this. We'll have a few more podcasts with some great guests, but we'll do this again, and maybe next time, those of you watching, maybe you can submit some questions. We can tackle those.
I think we need to argue next time.
We need to find a way to argue.
Yeah,
What we could do is we could just bring in, we'd probably find some combative people.
No, we're going to argue next one, I promise. We're going to figure something we don't agree on.
Appreciate you guys joining us, and stay tuned. We got some great guests coming.
Thank you.
We appreciate you tuning in to the LeverUp podcast, available right now on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So make sure you subscribe, and make sure you subscribe to both the On3 and Influencer YouTube channels, where you can catch all the video content, cut-ups, mashups from all of the LeverUp podcasts. And of course, follow us on Twitter and Instagram as well at On3 and at Influencer. Thank you so much for tuning in today, and stay tuned for more great guests to come on the LeverUp podcast.